Really, the reason I started going to church was essentially social interaction in a setting of loneliness. I would never have considered church as a way to pursue meaning in my life. I'd never used that or used faith in any way to draw meaning, but instead I was looking for meaning as I was lonely and honestly depressed. I started socializing with people that I enjoyed their company. One person in particular who asked probing questions and was always delightful and spoke well on a variety of issues. And he went to church. And so I went with him to a small group type of church environment called a house church. And I met a wonderful community there. And so it wasn't the faith that brought me to the faith. It was the people that brought me to the faith. And that was just, a result of my emotional state and a desire to find friends. And it was, just so happened to be that I was wrestling with these deep questions and was reading more and trying to understand what was happening. And I was just fertile ground for the calling of the Holy Spirit. So when one day I had a kind of a lightning bolt moment where I had been pursuing the gospel, I was reading the gospel as had been advised to me by a pastor in a specific church that I had been going to, that same church on Sunday services. He said, "Oh, you guys should read the gospel. If you've never gotten out of the gospel, read it." So I started reading it and expected that would be where it would come to me. It was I would read and I would have some profound insight and understand Jesus because I'm reading about him in the gospels. And as it turned out, it didn't come to me in that way. I went through the Gospel of Mark and then Matthew, and then I went through Mark. I went through the order in the Bible. And by the time I got to Luke, I was getting very disheartened. It just wasn't happening for me. I was not flying through this material. I was actually trying to spend time and being introspective, but I was doing it alone. And I didn't have anybody to help or guide me. I had no historical basis for Jesus, what it meant to be Jewish. And I was just confused and it wasn't coming alive to me. And when I look back to the journal entries from that time, I was actually kind of irritated a little bit by some of the caginess that I was reading. It wasn't like things weren't direct. I didn't know Jesus had been betrayed by a kiss. I thought it was just a horrible story, quite depressing, and it wasn't helping lift me out of my funk. One day on April 28th, I decided I'm going to get through this Gospel of Luke, and I am just finished with it. And I wish I had have just pressed onward to John, but that's not the story. So I got stuck that specific day on two readings that I got stuck on the story of this healing of the demoniac when Jesus came along to a man who was possessed by a legion of demons. And in this Bible story, he drives the demons out of this man and into pigs, and the pigs then rush headlong off a cliff and drown themselves. And at the time of my life, I was a pescatarian, so I hadn't eaten meat in ages. I actually had a shirt that said, with a pig's face on it, said, "No, I don't have any spare ribs." So I found this to be cruel. I didn't understand why this would have happened. I thought, oh, you're wasting this guy's life and his livelihood. And I didn't understand why would God do that? That seems wasteful. And then I kept trucking on. And then I got again to this transfiguration, which is I've encountered the story again in the Synoptic Gospels. And it didn't make any sense to me that they went up on a mountainside and they are supposed to pray, and Moses and Elijah show up, which I think is like a vision of something, I don't know what. And Jesus apparently is like transformed, looking like glowing white and super holy, or I don't even know. And Peter is there, and he wakes up and James and John as well. And Peter wakes up and he is like, "Whoa, I should have been doing something. Let's make some tents." And the whole story seemed very confusing to me. I didn't understand it at all. And in the very next line, it says, Peter didn't know what he was saying. I'm like, right, because I don't know what he's saying either. This doesn't make any sense. So I finished the book. I flew through the rest of that book. I closed it up and I'm like, I am done. And I went out that evening and I hung out with my friends at a bar and had too much to drink and woke up by some miracle the next morning early enough to go to church. And so I planned to go meet with my other group of friends in the Sunday service. And when I was there, I looked around for my friends and they weren't there. And I'm wearing bar clothes and I smell like alcohol, I'm sure. And I felt embarrassed. So I started getting up to leave because I waited and the music starting. It was kind of a casual experience. So people could just stroll in with their coffee cups. And by the time in the second song, they're still not there. And I'm thinking, I got to get out of here. Otherwise, I'm going to be leaving during the talk, which is rude. I decided to stay, but I wanted to sit in the back under the overhang of the upper balcony so I would be more hidden. And I kind of sat away from other people feeling kind of vulnerable and embarrassed about my presentation. And I sat there, and that message that day was about what it means to be a missionary for the Lord, and how Christian disciples view the mission field as someplace other than right where they are. And we view it as an international outreach type of endeavor. And he said that day that the reason why this is happening is because we're asleep to the mission field around us. And he described those two exact passages that I had gotten hung up on, and how Peter had been with Jesus, an intimate friend of this man, and he had possibly seen him do these miracles, many of these miracles, perhaps this exact miracle where he drove these demons out of this possessed man. And he described the scene as a man who could potentially have been walking around naked and possessed. And Jesus went to this man who was on the fringe of society and likely isolated, and intervened for him. And he took those demons out of that man and put them in swine, and they died. And that, even though we know that that was a profound experience for somebody that would have been there, they still didn't really, these disciples that were in the presence of Jesus still didn't know what they were dealing with. And then he talked about the transfiguration immediately thereafter and said, could you imagine if you had been with Jesus? And Peter was supposed to pray with him. And he compared it to the Garden of Gethsemane, falling asleep when Jesus has asked you to do something. And then you wake up, and all of a sudden something exciting is happening without you knowing it. And you're like, quickly, I got to look busy. I got to go do something. And that's when he said I should build some tents or something, and that he didn't know what he was talking about. And the pastor then said that the reason that we do that and we don't see the mission field right around us is we are tired, sleepy. We're not paying attention. We're not seeing the mission field right in front of us. And the reason we can't mission is because we are not as intimate and close to God as we should be. And we need to know him and love him and serve him so that we can work in this mission field right around us. And that was such a profound experience for me, that he would have used those two exact passages that I had gotten stuck on the day before and closed my Bible up, like done with it, to talk about witnessing the gospel to the people around you. Just blew me away. I just knew that was meant for me that day, that was meant for me. And I realized in that single moment that I didn't know God. And it was the emptiest feeling I had ever had. I felt like my whole life had been meaningless, that there was nothing there. And I felt hollow. And in that instant, I felt what I now realize was the Holy Spirit come. And it filled that void. It took that vacuum, showed it to me, and then filled it. And at that moment, I was a believer. And it was on April 29th, 2007. And I chased him pretty hard thereafter.